Hello and welcome to the Eco D2C podcast, where we break down the growth strategies behind successful and natural and eco-focused companies. I'm Luke and I'm here with Matt. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Luke. Glad to be here.
Could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and about Elustra Consulting?
Sure. So I've been in marketing and business for about 25 years, the majority of that with the natural products industry. And Elustra Consulting is a mix of, I do marketing consulting, leadership coaching, and team development. So it's a combination of all those offerings that have really been a benefit to a lot of companies in the industry.
Very cool. And before getting too much into business, can you tell us something interesting about yourself that most people do not know?
Sure. Most people don't know that I originally got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in photography.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Have those skills come into use when doing various marketing efforts with different brands?
yeah. In a lot of ways, they have. It was a fine arts degree, so I also had a lot of graphic design courses, and that's really how I got my start in marketing. I came up through started as a graphic designer and moved into marketing management, and then into more strategic roles. So yeah.
Very cool. And what led you to start Elustra?
I wanted to be out on my own, quite honestly.
Hmm.
I saw, was working with a lot of entrepreneurs in the natural products industry and saw that they were in between doing things by themselves and not quite up to where they could engage a full agency. So a lot of the marketing work that I do fits really well in filling those gaps for them. And then the coaching and team development work kind of rounds out the offering.
Gotcha. So let's talk about that growth that you help companies with. Can you walk us through a marketing strategy or process that you take companies through, and let's really slow this down so we can get into some of the numbers and just a step by step process. But is there a particular one that comes to mind that you lead companies through pretty often?
Yeah, a lot of it starts with a brand strategy,
Hmm.
and smaller entrepreneurs they may not have thought it through in such a formal way. So we look at exactly what their offering is, how it's differentiated in the market, who exactly their target market is. We may develop 3 or 4 different persona for that.
Hmm.
Then we look at where they are now and where they want to be and start to fill out the gaps there. And a lot of this is exploration around messaging and what really resonates with them as a founder or entrepreneur.
Hmm.
And then we build that out into statements and values that would resonate with the consumer.
Okay. And so, can we walk through what kind of exercises you do with brands and the order you do them in order to really tackle some of the brand formation that you're talking about here? Because, myself, for example, we do a lot of work with brands that need a lot of downstream marketing, so to speak. We do a lot of analyses of what keywords are being searched for. We do a lot of running ads and just trying to get the product into consumers' hands. And so a lot of that branding work has often been done before we come into the scene, or the brand really needs it and we just have to work with what they have. It really depends on the case and the scenario. But I would be super interested in hearing, like what, say I have, X probiotic brands that I've concocted, in my basement, and I've made sure that it's safe and healthy, and maybe I've got some preliminary packaging, maybe I don't. But what happens when I come to you? How do you gauge where I am, and then what tend to be the steps from there?
A lot of it I can tell from I'll look at a client's website or their packaging or whatever marketing they're doing now. Social media channels are great, and try to get
Mm,
a sense of where they are in terms of consistent messaging that's reaching the target audience. How well is the brand defined? Things like that, and that gives me a good sense. Usually, I can tell pretty quickly how much of that work they've done, and even if it looks like it's fully fleshed out, I like to start with some of those foundational questions at the beginning. Even going back to like what's the founder's why? Why are they in this business? Why this solution or this product?
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to really unveil a lot of the emotion behind the brand that we want to convey. So it's really at a very high level to understand what they're trying to do, what they want the brand to be, what's their vision of their role. Maybe they're bringing the power of plants to people, or they're solving an environmental issue, but really what's the energy behind the brand, and why does it exist? If we start there, then we can really start to craft some powerful messages that can reach out to different persona.
And what does testing some of those messages look like? At what point do different metrics come into play? Because all brands will either have or need to discover their why, and then, but what process do you go through between taking whatever that very personal answer may be and fitting it into what the market is actually looking for? What is that? Do metrics come into play at any point in this process? Like how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of it depends on budget and timing and what they've done so far. So, ideally there's a focus group where we can really dive into a lot of this, but a lot of brands that I work with don't have the budget for that. So we're going at it with a very grassroots approach.
How much does it typically cost to do a focus group?
I think they start around 5,000.
Okay.
And it depends. There's people that can do a little bit less, but that's where I've seen things starting.
Gotcha. So sorry to interrupt you there. But so what does a more grassroots product validation testing focus group look like?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the first thing is it's got to resonate with the founder. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really where the power starts. So we get that established. Then we can look at testing it through social media with different messaging on different posts. We can try subject lines within emails. There's a lot of ways to start feeling our way through that. And at this level, it's still a lot of gut check where, a change in a word here or there might only result in a 5% shift or something on an open rate or on a post engagement. But we got to look at also what kind of discussions and what kind of engagement that's bringing up, and what the response is to those different messages. So we do that through metrics. Obviously, that's a huge part of it, and that's something we definitely rely on. But there's also another level of, like I said, gut check, what just feels right.
Right. Some of these things that are a little harder to measure, and whether or not just knowing internally whether it fits, with the brand. As far as the metrics and different, some of the tools that you're mentioning for doing this kind of measurement. When you talk social media, are you talking organic versus paid? Are you talking one of the or two of them? Are you talking both? Are you talking just one? And do you have a go-to method that you often use to gauge these kinds of things?
I don't have a go-to method per se, although most of the time it ends up being a mix of Facebook and Instagram for the primary social media outlets. And that's like a really broad brushstroke, but they fit the demographics within the natural products consumer fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems that it works out that way. So Facebook in particular is neat because it's almost exclusively the older consumer, the 40 and up.
Mm-hmm.
And Instagram tends to be the other market, which are the millennials that we see a lot of activity in the natural products industry. So it's almost a split demographically between the two. And that's a nice way to start with some of that messaging and automatically separate which audiences we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. And what do metrics for success or failure look like when you're doing these social media tests?
I would say, really broadly that as long as we're pulling some kind of learning out of it, there really isn't a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what did we learn from this experiment? What are we going to start doing? What are we going to stop doing? What are we going to continue doing? Um, and go from there. So I think very broadly, engagement is far more important than how many likes we have, how many clicks we're getting. Well, clicks can count into that. But when I see a really, really good post, it's generating audience discussion. There's links going on. There's people talking back and forth. There's a lot of activity around it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that comes to mind, because there's a lot of different ways to use social media to get these kinds of learnings, but one particular test that kind of test that I've seen run before would be, let's say, around a couple grand in Facebook ads, going towards um, you know landing pages that you're A/B testing with different kinds of messaging. And you already have, and if this is an existing company, then obviously this is set up. But even if you don't have a product in yet, you can at least be taking you can have a credit card processor set up, so you can at least understand your audience's intent to buy. Now, is that a kind of test that you the kind of test that you're advocating for here, or is there another kind of test or set of metrics that come up? Because it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is organic versus just running a couple grand of ads and being like, hey, let's see if we were hitting the percentages that we really need here to know if this is going to work.
Yeah, well, they're two different things. I think the organic lends more towards brand identity, brand awareness, along
Mm-hmm.
those lines. And then yeah, I think for paid social, you're definitely looking at driving conversion of some kind, whether to newsletter or sales
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is. So it is very different. And yeah, in that case, I would be looking for a very specific metric within the framework of the entire campaign. So you can test your paid social for clicks and engagement, and then your landing page for conversions and so on and so forth down the road. So I see it as the first step in that customer acquisition process where you're driving towards purchase, which is
Mm-hmm.
different than a brand awareness play.
So what metrics work in a brand awareness play? Because like just the other day, I got another marketer's pitching me on LinkedIn to try to sort of complement the services that we offer, and they're really pitching organic. And they were bragging about hitting so many millions of views. And my response was, like, impressions are one thing. Like, that's a very easy inflated number to toss out, especially at brands that might not necessarily understand what metrics are more important than others. But that to me means a lot less than clicks, than conversions, and a lot of other things that we measure. Impressions is certainly some in the mix, but what metrics look like a successful brand play to you? Like, do you think I'm being a little myopic, just not even paying attention to that sort of thing, or is there something more here?
No, I think it's really around the activity around the post, likes, shares, comments, that kind of thing. I don't really follow the impressions metric too heavily,
Mm,
unless that's something specific that we're going for.
right.
But by and large, that's to me not such a great measure. And it's
Me neither.
yeah, exactly. And with if you're especially if you're working with an agency, that's almost to me like a little bit of a red flag. Like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, that's an easily acquired number, and it could mean not much. So
Hmm.
it's great, but in and of itself, it's not enough information. You need to ask below the surface on that kind of metric.
Hmm. And so when you're talking about engagement, like, let's say in the case of a new brand that is um, trying to get more awareness out there, like what kind of what level of engagement should they be looking to get from their posts, and how would you personally go about growing that?
Sure. I think the level of engagement depends on how big their audience is and the
Mm-hmm.
specific campaign or task that we're trying to do. One thing I've done with a lot of brands is tie together like 3 or 4 brands that have complementary products and do a giveaway where you have to like, share, and sign up for an email. So it's like a round robin, and
Mm-hmm.
those have worked really really well for a lot of brands. You get to share the name, you get your cross promotion going on, and everybody likes contests. So that's one strategy that works really really well, and it's totally grassroots. You don't have to pay for that kind of thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
So
Just for the listeners that might be, whose ears might have perked up with that, is there so are you so you're talking about forming partnerships with other brands with similar products, and then doing either doing a contest with a giveaway at the end of it, and then essentially using each other's audiences to try to build each other up, correct?
yeah, exactly.
And so when you're going around, if I'm thinking of how to grow this for, um, if I have, whatever imaginary brands that I might be hitting, and I'm trying to grow this, what size, when you're looking for, what are your criteria when looking for other products or brands to partner with to do this sort of thing?
Well, there's got to be some resonance around the brands themselves. I mean, I wouldn't want to do a sugar
Hmm.
laden soft drink with an organic sunscreen or
Sure.
something like that. So we've done ones with B Corps.
Hmm.
And that could be a whole range of different products. It's just focused around the raising awareness of what a B Corp is.
Hmm.
We've also done themed giveaways, like a summer one might be sunscreen, maybe some kind of kombucha or snack that you might take out or whatever. So it's hard. You can do a random one where it's just a bunch of like-minded companies that get together and do it, and those work fine. But in my experience, when it's around some kind of a theme, it tends to be a little more successful.
Sure. But just to really get down to the nuts and bolts, like let's say, if I have a new brand, like partnering with a company the size of Danone, or like Bobo's is pretty big around these parts as well, like that, getting them to share my product would be, amazing. But if I'm just starting out, maybe not realistic. So as far under the assumption that we're looking at brands that at least have enough of a philosophy, or at least have enough in common with us that their audiences are going to be interested, um, what criteria might you choose towards reaching out towards some of these other brands? How would you even find them? How would you find some of the smaller brands that might be willing to share your things?
Right. Yeah. Some of it is research. A lot of it is networking. Like I said, I've been in the industry for quite a while, so I
Mm,
know I can just connect them. I know people. But in terms of doing some research and making sure it's a good fit, they need to be within a certain range of number of followers and revenue. I mean, like you said, you can't have an entrepreneur approaching Danone. That's just not going to fly. But I
mm-hmm.
guarantee you that entrepreneur knows 3 or 4 other people that are starting brands in the industry, and could start something like this. I mean, it's pretty easy to do. So there's got to be, size wise, there's got to be some kind of congruence, and then also around mission and products, and um, you need to think that the two audiences are going to want to know about this product.
Mm-hmm. Um, should I only look for audiences that have a similar size to mine already, or how high could I go if I was really just starting out?
I've I've gone pretty high, and a lot of
Okay.
times it's who you know.
Mm-hmm.
You might know a social media coordinator at Danone, and you introduce them to
Shout out to
somebody.
Danone. Are you listening to my podcast?
Right, right. There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Um, do you and this is totally just off the cuff, but do you happen to remember what the size of that, the difference in those audience sizes might have been?
Yeah, when I started doing this for a pretty large company, this was a long time ago. They only had a few hundred Facebook followers, and we were partnering with people with probably 10,000, 15,000 followers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what uh, what gave us an advantage there was that it wasn't, obviously wasn't an equitable audience trade, but the company that I was working with at the time had a very, very strong brand and mission around it, enough that larger brands were willing to help them out and
Mm-hmm.
help give them a leg up.
Interesting. Can I ask what that brand's mission was that the larger companies was really that really what was resonating so well with these larger companies that they would be willing to go out of their way for a business that was not on their level?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is supply chain transparency, seed to shelf. Also, B Corp was a
Mm-hmm.
really big factor. I think that's a very very strong community where everybody wants to help each other, and you do see those really big brands sitting down at a small meeting with 10 or 15 people, and some of them are tiny entrepreneurs. So
Mm-hmm.
that shared sense of purpose can really go a long way.
Gotcha. So the brand, the smaller brand that was involved in this scenario was also a B Corp.
Yes.
Got
Yes.
you. Got you. Um, yeah, no, I've also heard a lot of things to that effect from the B Corp community. Like there's a lot of solidarity within that community in particular. Um, Interesting. So to bring it back to, well, actually, before bringing it back to a larger question surrounding product validation, is I like to try to bring it back to metrics where possible. What When we're trying to build our organic audiences, um, and we're trying to make these branded plays, what are the and it, I know it depends on what the experiment is, but what are the top metrics that you look for?
I would say they would be around engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be likes, shares, comments, um,
Mm-hmm.
clicks on a very particular campaign. If we're driving newsletter subscribers or click to purchase, then I would be looking definitely at clicks. But for the most part, it's really around that, getting people involved on
Mm-hmm.
something beyond just a click level. So if you're getting comments, if you're getting discussion started because of your posts, that's a really good thing. That's going to push your post up in other people's feeds, and that's where I've seen that's where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm. And apart from, we just took a bit of a dive into giveaways, but um, are there any other brand plays and audience growth strategies that you frequently use with a lot of these brands that you work with?
Yeah, another one that really resonates well is any kind of social or environmental commitments or volunteer work or donations. That really resonates with audiences across the demographics, especially in the
Hmm.
natural products industry.
But I imagine you still have to have partners for those shout outs as well, or to at least be a part of the same groups. Because, if I only have, say, 100 followers, it's not likely that I can make the best commitment. I can make commitments better than any other company in the industry. But if there's not an audience to hear it,
Yeah,
or
well,
or is this integrated into a PR play as well?
you could do that, yeah, and a lot of times it can work with the whatever organization you're working with is willing to tag you and push out some social on your behalf. That's great. There's like Habitat for Humanity will tag companies that help them build houses. So
Hmm.
you get some great traction that way. You get some exposure. It's just good all around. And then that's the kind of stuff that those are the posts that you'll find people sharing more of on social media than just information about your product or something factual.
Can you give us an example of a commitment, of this kind of commitment and how it went for that particular brand?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to B Corp and they're,
Mm-hmm.
they do volunteer days. Certainly in this area, I think they do volunteer days at least once a month, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally Boulder is a industry group in the area too. They also organize volunteer days. So there's a lot of ways to get involved with it. I know Habitat for Humanity is fairly well organized and it's easy to do. There's like community food share is an obvious one for a lot of food companies that can either donate product or take their team there for an afternoon to help out, and that's just all good. Everybody loves
Mm-hmm.
seeing that, and it's good team building. It's good for employee engagement, everything else.
And not to insert too much capitalism into a conversation about doing social things that really align with your mission, but if we're, small companies will have to pick and choose where they're diverting, where they're, putting a lot of their energies. If someone is doing, let's say they're doing a day with, volunteering with Habitat, or they're doing a day volunteering, with food drives or whatever. Um, what size audience would you look for in the partner that you are tapping, um, to do this kind of play?
Well, probably bigger is better in that sense. The larger the company, the more reach you're going to have. I think it depends. If you go with somebody too big, they're not going to be willing to give you a shout out on social or any other kind of mention. So I think the local driven companies tend to be better with that. Certainly, they have more connection to the community, and there's a greater sense of helping the local area out. But
Hmm.
um, I don't know. It could go either way, I think.
Um, as far as inflection points go for these kinds of organic efforts, what time period are we typically talking, and how long will you typically work with a client before the client starts to see a lot of results from these efforts? And I know organic can be hard to measure for a number of reasons. We're looking for brand awareness here. Um, but is this something that you typically see as being a slow build, or is it something that you see there being a lot of hockey sticks with, along the way? How long, what do these timelines usually look like, and inflection points, if they happen along a particular journey, is there, are there certain moments, that they do tend to happen?
Yeah, I think definitely with the smaller companies, those inflection points are when you've got a winner,
Yeah.
and that could be a partnership with another big brand or something else. So they do happen. I think in general, though, I like to push for slower growth that is quality versus high growth. You can put eyeballs on anything if you throw enough money at it, but
Hmm.
are they going to turn into customers or brand advocates? That's the question. So um, I advise to focus on the long term game. Now,
Hmm.
within that, companies do have to get a return on their investment for social, and a lot of smaller companies, there's a sense of urgency, and that's where I would dial in with paid advertisement driving to purchase. It could even be getting involved with Amazon and some of their advertising.
Hmm.
That's where you get really like a quicker return on the
Hmm.
product. But for example, Amazon, it's difficult to follow up with customers. So
Hmm.
you can make the sale, but how do you get them into your network to garner additional sales and build that long-term relationship?
So this is actually a really important point that you're touching on. I actually just had Sam Hager on as a guest recently, and he's just an incredible source of knowledge about all things related to Amazon. Eco D2C, we do a lot of Amazon work ourselves. And, for CPG brands in particular, being able to bring your customers back is enormously important. And Amazon can be kind of a black box. And I see all the time the difference between brands that have a certain amount of branded traffic and brands that are unknown. Like if your brand, like the more brand presence you have, the easier your Amazon journey is going to be. The more return you're going to get for your ad dollars. All of these things do affect each other in some really heavy ways. The the difficulty that I see a lot of brands having is in knowing what kind of organic strategy to form, like how much time they should realistically be spending on it, because it can be a black hole. If advertising can be a black hole for dollars, organic can be a black hole for time.
Right.
And so deciding how exactly to form that strategy and how much time to spend on it, I think is difficult for a lot of folks. Do you have any pointers regarding that?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is develop a social media calendar, and the longer you're planning that out, the better. So at least be a month ahead on it, and figure out if your brand has like really three big differentiators that define your brand, like brand pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to hit one of those once a week, and then sprinkle in your product posts, your features and benefits, so that you're doing, I don't know, maybe a 50-50 ratio on those. And eventually you'll, with the brand pillar posts, it's fine to repeat those in a lot of ways. Maybe you change some assets or some wording, but you want that consistency of image. I mean, it really, or consistency of message. It takes the consumer a number of times to really identify your brand with what you're saying. So those can be, if a brand put together 12 to 20 brand pillar posts that could circulate and rotate, it'd probably be 6 months worth of social media effort right there.
Mm-hmm. But as far as timelines go, I mean, 6 months can be a fair amount of time. How long would you recommend going, collecting all that data and how many engagements you're getting for different kinds of posts before altering the strategy? Like how
Oh,
large a data set do we need to make decisions here?
you need something. I mean, 500 followers is probably not going to be giving you a whole lot of feedback. I think it's when you get up around maybe 1,000, even 1,000 is a little light, but then you can start making some decisions based on messaging and assets and all of that. But even with that, I think you want to remain consistent. I mean, if you find that the audience isn't responding to a particular mission that you have, or maybe it's the entrepreneur's why of why they got into the business, you might be looking at switching audiences, really, because
Mm-hmm.
there's some really foundational stuff to a brand identity that you don't want to mess with unless you've got some really, really good feedback. So
Mm-hmm.
if you've done your homework and you've connected your sense of purpose with that messaging, you should be getting pretty close. So I think I would say start looking at audiences and messaging together. But even then, it's hard to do that until you've got 1,000 or even 5,000 followers.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend? So as you said just a couple minutes ago, the first thing that you focus on is you sit down with the founder and you talk about their why. Um, there's a lot of folks with especially those trained in like lean methodology that would argue with starting with the customer first and then simply trying to build what they build what they're asking for. And I know you do a lot of workshops looking at the different customer personas. Um, is there a reason you like to start with one than the other, or how do these things inform themselves or inform each other in your work?
That's, I think it's not an either or. It's got to be a balance of the two.
Hmm.
However, mainly I think it's mainly because I do work with smaller brands that passion is what's keeping the brand going, what's giving the entrepreneur the drive to cut through all the hardships and everything else to rise above and be successful. And if you went and switched from an like uh, organic tea to selling soft drinks because that's what you're going to sell more of, that's obviously not a,
Hmm.
there's got to be some middle ground. So yeah, the audience feedback is definitely important, but it might be around some smaller elements to the product or the brand rather than the driving mission and focus.
Hmm. Gotcha. How in these workshops in which you're diving into personas, can you tell us a little bit about how that process looks? Because I mean, it's almost a joke going around some of these natural product conferences about like, oh, like, whatever millennial moms want, kind of thing. Um, so and it of course depends on what product you're selling. But I'd love just to hear a little bit about what that process looks like of identifying who your ideal customer is.
Yeah, some of it is when starting out with a brand, there's definitely some gut feeling around it, but it's also around the specific benefits of that product and who that's going to resonate with. So let's see. You need to figure that persona out before you've really started with your marketing efforts. So it's a matter of
Mm,
matching the features and benefits of the product with the right persona. And sometimes it's you really need to think out of the box in terms of when you start getting really, really focused on it. Like you might say millennial moms, but
mm-hmm,
single moms, in the Southwest, or that like
mm-hmm,
yoga, or don't eat meat, whatever. There's a lot of different segments that you can start to work with, and sometimes it's a matter of developing a few different persona that are very, very similar, except for that one minor thing. And now you're
mm-hmm,
getting, I think that's where you start moving from persona into like audience definition, like on social
mm-hmm,
media, or when you're looking for specific people to reach out to.
mm-hmm,
And that's where you can start certainly getting some metrics and seeing what works and what messages work with what groups.
mm-hmm,
But, but that overarching persona is probably going to be pretty accurate. From where you first started, it typically doesn't change that much. Although you will develop insights around those specific interests and correlations.
mm-hmm. No, it's an interesting thing to dive into. There's I mean, it's really easy to come across companies that are, they'll have some pretty wide ranging use cases for who their products, appeals to. Maybe they think it appeals to all of these, communities equally, or there's just like such opportunity because they have something that's applicable across a number of different categories. And so, I'll have conversations with these founders, and I'll be like, so who's your target market? And then they'll say, well, like everyone, within such and such. And then I have to figure out a polite way to say that's not an answer. Um, so, um, are there any particular ways that methods that you have of measuring some of these audiences against one another that we haven't already discussed, as far as running social ads and things like this? Um, I think there's a real lack of product validation going on out there. But aside from some of the methods we've already talked about, is there any way that you like to compare some of these audiences and do some of the definition that you're mentioning?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think a lot of it is knowledge gained over time with
Mm-hmm.
different audience segments that you work with. But for starting out, it's tough. I mean, you've got to narrow it down as much as you can, but you don't want to forget about markets that your product might not apply to, or might apply to as well. So I think if you can start with a basic, gender, age, married, unmarried, income level, things like that, that's a good place to start, and then you can refine from there.
Mm-hmm. What can you give me an example of looking at an audience that founders thought would really resonate with their product, and then it didn't resonate as well as they might have thought, and maybe they had to pivot, or maybe there's some iterations that need to be made to the messaging of the product itself. But how do you handle things when the tests come back in ways that are a little lackluster compared to what the hopes were for a particular audience, for a particular defined audience?
I, I don't see it really as a negative. I think that's a failure to me is a really, really good data point. And
Mm-hmm.
that's an indication that, well, maybe the audience wasn't right, or the message wasn't right, or the product wasn't a good fit, any number of things. So, it's that old adage for that salespeople, for every no you get, you're getting closer to a yes. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that holds true too for audiences. That, okay, now you can exclude people that drive black BMWs or whatever from your mix. So for me, it just narrows the focus more. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I like getting a failure like that as much as I do a resounding success, because now I know I don't need to go waste my time and money on this particular audience.
Mm-hmm. Um, is Interesting. Are there other tools that you like to use as much as is social your go-to? I guess is what I'm trying to ask. And are there, like, how often does email play into what you do, and maybe in some of these other channels? Like, is it fair to say that one of them is, as far as exploring audiences, is it fair to say that social is the backbone, or are there others that enter into play as well?
I think social's where I start, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy. The metrics are so deep, and it's so easy to get them.
Mm-hmm.
You can start looking at metrics as soon as you have somebody viewing your stuff, viewing your posts. So that's a really, really good place to start. Email is certainly a huge component of any CPG brand, and I think it's starting to see a comeback. There was a lot of bad press around email, and that it was just filling people's mailboxes with junk. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting some extremely targeted drip campaigns from big national brands. They
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't worthwhile. So I think email is still a crucial component, particularly around um, once you've started to get some people's interest in your brand. Email is a great way to start that customer journey, and then for retention, and further down for building brand ambassadors. I don't think you can beat it.
Mm-hmm. Um, let's talk about that for a second. How do you see email being used right and wrong by a lot of these brands? Because I've also seen a lot of things that you're talking about, both with email getting bad press, and then you know you get into looking at some of the metrics for some of these companies using email right, and they're getting very impressive returns. What difference do you see between those two buckets, so to speak?
Yeah, I think one of the big misunderstandings that I see is that more subscribers are better. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's the other way around. And when you get people dropping off your list, okay, fine, maybe your content's off. In a lot of cases, it's people who just aren't that interested in your brand.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good thing. Those are people that are not going to be opening your emails. They could, in fact, be marking you as spam. So when you drop those people off, your delivery rate goes up, and that increases your reputation with the internet service providers. So everything gets better.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're focusing on the right people at that point. That's not to say you want to drive people off. And if you're hitting people's inboxes 5 times a week, you're probably stepping over that line. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say don't. One of my big pieces of advice is don't focus on that subscriber number so much, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay if you're starting to drop some.
Okay. And so in place of focusing on the subscriber metric, what metric would you emphasize paying more attention to?
I would say anything that's either increasing sales or brand ambassadorship. So if you could be pushing people to leave reviews or, obviously purchasing your product or even posting to social about something. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're starting to get that kind of involvement, that's a crystal clear sign of success.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, it's email's an interesting animal. And in my personal experience, I've seen it evolve in some interesting ways over the last couple of years. But I definitely don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. As far as the kind of content that you see these successful brands sending out versus unsuccessful brands, um, I mean, of course, we want to be sending content that our readers are engaging with. Otherwise, they will hit subscribe faster than you can blink. But within that scope, is there a particular kind of content that you see successful brands using and successful brands not using?
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus on the quick promotion, 25% off this week only.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. I mean, once in a while, that's fine, and you will get some sales from it. I think the content that is it's bridging the gap between your product and a certain lifestyle. And
Mm.
when you can do that and you're connecting with the right audience, you're going to draw that audience in on an emotional level to connect with your brand, and you can't beat that. So um, let's see, an example might be I get one from a clothing manufacturer that does a lot of environmental work. So
Mm-hmm.
by bragging about that environmental work, they're essentially saying our brand equals this value around the environmental work. So
Right.
if you wear our clothes, you'll be identified with this value. And
Mm-hmm.
and when you can bridge that with the content you're creating, you're going to have customers for a very long time.
And for this particular kind of content, are you referring to specifically, because there's a couple different ways to that can go. There's content that's like, hey, look at this good thing that we did. Maybe going out with Habitat on a weekend, employees, or this is we managed to rescue like so many tons of CO2 from being released into the air. There's like, oh, you can accomplish this environmental goal specifically in your personal life by using our product. Like, there's a lot of different ways to go within that. Is there a particular one that you've seen working really well recently?
Huh.
Because this also ties back into the conversation on content for social media as well. If there's certain themes that really work with your audience and you can dial those in, then that's a lot of content for both of these channels.
Yeah, I think for a specific campaign, there's a soap company called Dr. Squatch, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all natural soap made for men. They have an incredible welcome series with their email, or they did it maybe about a year ago when I first became aware of the brand and started using their soap.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a sort of a kitschy identification of the manly man and this
Yeah.
Sasquatch type with all natural soap that's good for you. And they did it in such a way that you find yourself laughing at yourself a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
and just that identification was just handled beautifully. And
Mm-hmm.
I still get emails from them. They're still doing a great job. I don't get the welcome drip anymore, but they're doing some really good stuff. That'd be a great one to subscribe to just to see what you get.
Just to just to see what their format is and see how it might apply to what your brand is doing. No, I
Yeah,
totally hear that.
yeah.
Um, I have an entire folder in my Gmail of companies that do things well as reference points, just to kind of keep up with what some of these hyper successful brands are doing and how to iterate some of those things. Um, Very, very interesting. What are some common pitfalls that you see brands falling into?
Um, in general, across the marketing spectrum.
Sure, like related to social email, brand formation, product validation, like any of these topics that we've discussed so far.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that, and I know I said that a brand has to resonate. You have to keep that energy that the founder had when they started,
Mm-hmm.
but ignoring what the audience is saying is probably the biggest pitfall. So I don't think in the natural products industry I haven't seen too much where it's gone too commercial and it's completely sold out and there's no um, resonance with the brand. It's just totally productized. I don't see that too much in this industry, but I think where things do fall apart is a failure to really differentiate your offerings and figure out how that's going to speak to a particular audience. And I'm thinking in particular around the CBD industry. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of just CBD, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. How do I know how is this different from anything else? And it could be the claims you're making. It could be the packaging. It could be organic, but people jumping on bandwagons too quickly, I think, is
Mm.
a big pitfall I see. And with entrepreneurs in particular, it's kind of that shiny thing syndrome where you can go chase something just because it seems like a good thing and there's a lot of people making a lot of money at it, or so it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think staying focused while being open to possibilities, but having the skill to push away the stuff that's a distraction from your mission.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. Um, what about what about pitfalls in executing some of these different kinds of campaigns?
There's a few. I think I see a lot of basing decisions based on very small metrics. It might be, like I was saying earlier, an audience of 500 on social is
Mm-hmm.
um, it takes a while to move needles, and especially at that lower end. So I wouldn't throw an idea or a campaign out just because it's not immediately successful.
Right.
And that goes for paid as well. That I've talked with a number of small entrepreneurial brands, and I think sometimes the assumption is, well, let's throw $1,000 a month at Google Ads, and we'll get
Mm-hmm.
5,000 in sales.
Yeah.
Well, you might, but you're not going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like I said, those you have to test your creative, you have to test your audience, your conversions. You can get a 5-to-1 return is insane for paid ads. You can get there, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah. No, this is something that I see all the time as well. Brands, you know, um, brands will want to see ROI pretty much immediately. And especially if they're like small and scrappy and they're just, like pulling together budget from wherever they can, it's really easy to dream of like, oh, like I just get this marketing machine running and then it pays for itself and then I can scale it from there. And there'll be a serious underestimation of the upfront cost to get that data in both money and time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's a very like that's the first barrier you have, and it is not one that you're going to jump over in the next day, week, month, um, or even sometimes half a year, depending on how much budget you actually have to be putting towards these things and getting answers. Um, what's the minimum metric as far as just for a simple thing like followers? Like what's a number that you see and you're like, oh well, that's a good enough number to be able to make some educated decisions.
I think on something like Facebook or Instagram, somewhere around 5,000
Mm-hmm.
is
5,000
pretty rock
followers.
solid.
Right.
Yeah, you could at 1,000 you can start to try some different things, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't go sinking a lot of money into decisions based on that, and
Right.
it's just too small of a number.
Gotcha. Do you see how do you see some of these platforms and the way that we measure audience validation and doing brand formation changing?
Yeah, I think technology has come so far. I've been doing this for a while, and the like what you can do now with some of the CRM systems, Hootsuite or and even HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's unbelievable the amount of data you can get and how quickly and easily you can customize.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the future's going. We're going to see a lot more customized messaging for your particular interests.
Mm-hmm.
It's very good now. It's sometimes hit or miss. I get some weird stuff once in a while. I'm like, oh, that was because I could tell I was shopping for, I don't know, something stupid, and now I'm getting messages about it.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to get really, really good, really, really fast because there's a lot of money involved.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at any brand that's involved with Amazon. If you start paying attention to what they're looking at and the kind of metrics and the variability or the variables that you can play with, it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the targeting and precision is just going to get more and more important.
Mm-hmm. I also see that happening. The tools are simply getting more complex.
Yeah,
And that's to the benefit of the marketer or the brand, but it's also um, like these marketplaces are also heating up.
yeah, yeah.
Um, what is the challenge that you face in your own business?
Oh, with my own business, probably focus. I think there's a lot of people and brands that I want to work with. Um, there's a lot of synergy that I find with environmental companies, with solar power companies,
Mm-hmm.
the gamut of B Corps, the natural products industry, and I'm kind of all over the place in terms of industry. I'm looking for that
Mm-hmm.
connection for social and environmental awareness and responsibility. And I think so many companies are moving in that direction and incorporating corporate social responsibility into their business plans. That pool is getting really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I need to focus a little more on industries, company size, that type of thing.
I hear you. I hear you. Are you yourself a B Corp?
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm in the middle of my assessment, and I actually thought, well, B Lab does, one of the requirements is you have to be in business for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I only started my company in March, so I thought I had to wait till next March, but they allow me to count the year before where I was a sole proprietor. So just
Mm-hmm.
found out I'm eligible, and working with some students from CSU who are volunteering to help work me through the assessment program.
I might contact you about that myself sometime soon because I've been um, because there's the whether it's the assessment or the pre-assessment that you can enter into, while you're waiting for your company to be around for the required amount of time, and some other such things. There's a good friend of mine who works with B Corps in the area, and so I was inquiring with her about how exactly to get involved. It's been really good to see them grow over the past several years to be the size that they are and to have the community that they do.
Yeah.
Not not just go shamelessly doing plugs. I just really love them.
Oh, it is. It is. It's wonderful. And it's a great, great community of people.
Hmm.
Everybody I've met has been super positive and very engaged. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. And it is, as a solopreneur going through the assessment, I have a lot of questions because
Hmm.
um, I don't have employees, so how else can I get points? And there's a lot of back and forth with it.
Hmm. I hear you. And where can our listeners find you?
Our listeners can find me at elustraconsulting.com. That's ELUSTRA consulting.com. And I have a website and a newsletter. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, a little bit on Facebook.
Hmm. All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to talking more, exchanging some B Corp notes and other such things.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Luke. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Okay, you too.